They didn't even wait for the sun to finish rising before they gutted my world. On the morning of my 18th birthday, the air inside the house felt colder than usual, like the walls themselves had been holding their breath all night, waiting for the moment to strike. There were no balloons, no cake baking in the oven, no trace of my mother's usual syrupy sweet humming. The silence pressed down like fog on my skin. Something was wrong. I could taste it. I walked into the kitchen and saw them sitting there, my parents, or the people I had, until that moment, believed were my parents, stiff and unnaturally composed like strangers sitting in a waiting room, pretending they weren't about to ruin a life. The coffee pot was full, untouched. My birthday card, if there ever was one, was nowhere to be seen. "Sit down, Arya," my father said. His voice lacked any of the warmth it used to carry, the kind that once tucked me in at night, the kind that used to read fairy tales with voices and silly accents when I was small enough to still believe in magic. I didn't sit. I just stared at them both, waiting for something, anything, that made sense. My mother folded her hands, slow and deliberate, and looked at me without blinking. "We need to tell you something," she said, her tone as neutral as stone. "We're not your real family. You're adopted." Just like that. No lead-in. No soft landing. She might as well have announced the weather. I blinked once. Then again. The cold inside the house now made perfect sense. It was leaking out of them, seeping from their every word, their every still breath. My legs moved on their own, guiding me to the chair across from them, but I didn't sit so much as collapse. The room spun once. Then again. But I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you wear when you're happy. It was the kind that cracks across your face when everything inside you breaks so fast and so loud that the only thing left to do is pretend it's all part of the plan. They looked uncomfortable. Good. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I wanted them to carry this moment with them for the rest of their lives, buried in the pit of their stomachs like a rusted key to a door they should have never opened. "There's more," my father added, shifting like his skin didn't fit right. He reached under the table and pulled out a small duffel bag, my duffel bag, the one I used for overnight trips. It was packed. "You have to move out," he said, and the words didn't waver. Today. Just like that. 18 years raised in a house that wasn't mine by people who never intended to keep me. 18 years thinking I was loved, thinking I belonged, thinking there was something sacred in the walls of the home I swept and mopped and decorated for Christmas. 18 years for what? A bag and an eviction notice on the day I became an adult. I didn't say a word. My fingers grazed the bag strap. It was light. Too light. They hadn't packed everything, just enough to say they tried. Enough to claim they weren't monsters. I could see it now, the story they'd tell their friends. "She left on her own," they'd say. "She was ready." It was time. But I wasn't ready. And this wasn't time. This was a betrayal dressed in mourning clothes, pressed and ironed to look like logic. It was a lie pretending to be the truth. Still, I didn't cry. I picked up the bag and walked toward the door without looking back. My heart beat steady, loud, alive. Because they had no idea. They had no idea that I already knew. And they had no idea what I was about to do next. 3 weeks before the cold dawn of my 18th birthday, before the duffel bag, before the smiles died in our living room, I found something buried in silence and insulation that redefined everything I had ever known. It started with a simple plan, a teenager's impulse rooted more in frustration than suspicion. The upstairs attic had been off limits since before I could remember, locked behind a warped oak door at the end of the hallway that creaked like a warning every time the wind passed through. I had only ever seen my father go up there, always alone, always when he thought I was asleep or gone. My mother never mentioned it, and I knew better than to ask. But that night, something in me didn't care about permission anymore. It was just past midnight, and the house had finally fallen into that deep, unnatural stillness it always seemed to hold after dark. The kind of silence that didn't comfort, it stalked. I moved barefoot, slow and careful, the way I had taught myself to move whenever I needed to go unnoticed. The lock on the attic door was old, a rusted latch held in place by a stubborn hook I'd studied from afar for years. It gave way with a quiet groan, and then I was inside. The air was different there, heavier somehow. Dust coated every surface in a fine gray film, like time itself had been ground into powder and left to settle on forgotten memories. Boxes were stacked in careless towers, old furniture draped in yellowed sheets that looked like ghosts frozen mid-scream. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that something inside me whispered that I was close. And then I saw it. A small, pale blue folder wedged between the rafters and an old trunk, sealed with a piece of frayed twine that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. My name was written on the cover, not just the name I used every day, but my full name, the one that only ever appeared on school forms and medical records, Aria May Callan. The handwriting was neat but slanted, as if written in haste or fear. My fingers hesitated before pulling the twine loose. Something told me once I opened it, there would be no way back. The first thing I saw was a birth certificate, not the one I'd seen in the family safe, not the polished government-issued one with embossed seals and my parents' names printed in gold ink. This one was faded, edges curled with age, and the names beside the boxes labeled Mother and Father were not Martha and James Callan. The woman's name was Delilah Rose Wren. The man's was left blank. Below that certificate were photographs, dozens of them, glossy with time and marked by fingerprints that didn't belong to me. In every photo, a younger version of me, no more than a few months old, was cradled in the arms of a woman I had never seen in my life. Her eyes were dark like mine, but her hair was the kind of wild gold that catches fire under sunlight. There was a kind of feral peace in her smile. She didn't look like a stranger. She looked like someone who'd loved me once. The letters came next. Some were folded crisply. Others were torn at the edges, stained with water and smeared ink. They weren't addressed to me, but they mentioned me constantly. "She's doing better today," one began. "The fever's gone." She held my finger for nearly an hour. Another one said, "I don't care what the doctors say. She's strong. She'll survive this." But the last note, the one that was folded over 3 times and sealed with tape so brittle it cracked when I peeled it, was different. It was only 5 lines long, but it made my skin go cold. "She's not safe. Don't let her find out. If she remembers, it will start again. Burn this. Forget me. Protect her at all costs." There was no signature. No date. Just the ominous finality of someone who had vanished before they could be questioned. I sat there for hours on the attic floor, legs folded beneath me, the folder spread open like a map I didn't know how to read. My heart was thundering against my ribs, my mind spinning in circles, grasping for the one thing it had always clung to, my identity. But whatever that had been, it wasn't real. I had been someone else. I had belonged to someone else. And whoever that woman was, Delilah Wren, she hadn't just given birth to me. She had feared for me. Enough to vanish. Enough to erase herself. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I did what I had always done best. I started collecting proof. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I smiled at my mother's grocery lists and nodded through my father's lectures about curfews and college applications. I packed my bag for school. I kissed their cheeks out of habit. But when the sun went down, I became a different girl entirely. I began searching. I went back to the attic 4 more times, always when they were asleep, always making sure to cover my tracks. I found documents hidden beneath boxes labeled Christmas decorations and old taxes, none of which had anything to do with holidays or finances. Instead, they were hospital records from a clinic I had never heard of in a town I'd never been to. There were discharge papers, medical scans, even a doctor's note that referenced neurological abnormalities and a sensitive patient history. There were phone records, 2 old ones bundled together in rubber bands, with dozens of calls placed to a number marked only as R. Some of them were only seconds long. Others lasted hours. And then there were the journal entries, handwritten in ink that had begun to fade, dated back over a decade, scrawled in the same slanted script I'd seen on the folder. They weren't signed, but I knew they belonged to my mother, or the woman I had thought was my mother. In them, she chronicled strange events that had happened when I was a child. Things I had no memory of. Dreams I had described that later matched news reports. Conversations I'd had in my sleep. One entry said, she said the name again. Delilah. We told her it was a dream. But she knew things no 5-year-old could have known. I read that line a dozen times. And then I read it again. Something about it dug its nails into the back of my neck and refused to let go. I had always known I was different. Not in the way every teenager thinks they're different. Not in the melodramatic way that fills poetry notebooks and social media captions. This was deeper, older, something rooted in my bones. I had dreams I couldn't explain. Thoughts that didn't feel like mine. Sometimes, I would walk into rooms and feel overwhelming dread for no reason. Or I would say things before other people did, as if I was remembering, not predicting. I had thought I was broken. I had thought I was sick. But now, I was beginning to wonder if I was something else entirely. I started keeping my own notes. Dates. Dreams. Strange feelings. Coincidences that weren't so coincidental. I logged everything. The night I walked by a man in the grocery store and felt a jolt of panic so strong I nearly dropped my basket, only to see his face on the news the next day, arrested for armed robbery. The moment in class when I wrote an answer down 5 seconds before the teacher asked the question. The scar on my wrist that I never remembered getting, but that appeared in every photo from the age of 6 onward, the exact shape of a symbol I would later find in the corner of one of Delilah's letters. I was unraveling, but not in the way they had always warned me I would. I was unraveling into something truer, stronger, sharper. The final piece of the puzzle came 2 nights before my birthday. I found an old key taped to the underside of my mother's sewing desk, hidden beneath a drawer that had always been stuck. It was small, iron, and cold as ice. Attached to it was a tag, shed. That night, when the house was asleep and the wind howled like something dying outside the windows, I took a flashlight and crept into the backyard. The shed door opened with a reluctant groan. Inside, it was nothing like I remembered. I had only been in there once or twice as a child, back when it had been full of gardening tools and rusted lawn chairs. Now, the walls were lined with bookshelves, real ones, crammed with files, maps, black and white photographs, and boxes labeled with names I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a table. On it, a map of the state, pinned with red string and notes written in capital letters. All of them connected to one word, Delilah. And beneath that, another word, scrawled like a curse, inheritance. I didn't understand everything I was seeing. Not yet. But I understood enough. They hadn't just lied to me. They hadn't just stolen me from someone who loved me. They had done it because they were afraid, not of losing me, but of what I might become. The moment my boots hit the driveway, something shifted, not just in the air, but deep inside me, like a storm finally pushing through the cracks in an old dam. I didn't look back. Not at the porch, not at the windows, not at the faces I had once called family, the ones who didn't flinch when they told me I wasn't theirs. Every step away from that house was a heartbeat louder, a breath clearer, a future closer. But the world wasn't going to let me leave quietly. I had just passed the edge of the neighborhood, the streets still damp from the night storm, the sun barely a whisper behind the trees, when I heard the low hum of tires slow to a crawl beside me. There weren't many cars on that stretch of road that early, especially not ones that moved like they had a purpose. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even glance over at first. My instincts screamed at me to keep moving. But then the car did something different. It didn't drive past. It pulled up alongside me and matched my pace. I stopped. And slowly, so slowly, the passenger window slid down with a soft mechanical hiss, like a breath being drawn before a confession. The face that appeared behind the glass stole the breath straight from my chest. It was her. The woman from the photographs. The woman with the wildfire hair and the dark eyes that mirrored my own so precisely it made my knees weaken. She wasn't older than I expected. She wasn't friendlier. She was sharper. Her face looked like it had been carved by conflict, shaped by years of running from something that still hadn't caught her, but kept getting closer. Her hand gripped the wheel like she'd never let it go. Her voice, when she spoke, came out low, urgent, unafraid. "You're in danger," she said, eyes locking on mine like steel snapping into place. "Get in." The world around me tilted. Every instinct I had, every whisper of caution that had kept me alive and invisible for years, screamed not to trust her. But the part of me that had been screaming even louder since the attic, the one that had seen the letters and held the birth certificate with shaking hands, knew something else. This wasn't a stranger. This was a storm I had always been part of. I climbed into the car. The second the door clicked shut, the woman hit the gas, and we peeled down the road like hell was behind us, and maybe it was. She didn't say anything at first. Her eyes stayed on the road, her jaw set, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I watched her. I studied every freckle, every line etched into her face like a map of decisions that had brought her here to me. It was me who spoke first. "Who are you?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. She exhaled, not like she was relieved, but like she had been holding her breath for 18 years. "My name is Delilah Wren," she said, her voice steady but brittle. "And I'm the reason you were taken." The silence that followed was deafening. Not because I didn't have 1,000 questions, but because that one sentence carried more weight than all of them combined. I stared at her, watching the shape of her mouth, the flicker in her eyes, trying to match this woman with the gentle figure from the baby photos and the terrified handwriting in the attic letters. She wasn't either of those things anymore. She was something else now. And so was I. "Start talking," I said. "All of it. No lies. No half-truths. No more riddles. Tell me why they took me. Tell me why you stayed away." Delilah didn't slow the car. If anything, she pressed harder on the gas. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she began, her voice wrapped in regret. "You were born into something most people don't survive. A legacy buried so deep it took me years to even understand it myself. And by the time I did, it was too late to stop what had already started." I said nothing, just listened. I was young, 19. Stupid. Thought I could escape what my family was into, what they passed down from generation to generation like heirlooms made of blood and whispers. But there are things you don't run from. There are names you don't speak. And when I found out I was pregnant with you, I knew I had one chance to end it. I turned toward her, slowly. "And what?" Delilah's lips pressed into a tight line. "It's not just about you, Arya. It's about what you can do. What you already are. You think those dreams, those coincidences, those shadows that follow you were just part of growing up broken? No. They were the beginning. You're not just different. You're what they've been waiting for. And the people who raised you? They weren't just keeping you hidden. They were keeping the world safe from you." I felt my stomach twist. "I haven't hurt anyone," I said. "I don't even know what I'm capable of." Delilah nodded. "Yet. But it's coming. The moment you remember who you are, what's inside you, it unlocks everything." I leaned back against the seat, trying to breathe through the rising tide inside my chest. "Then why did you leave me?" I asked, finally. "Why let them take me? Why hide?" She didn't look at me, but her hands trembled on the wheel. "Because I made a deal," she said. "Because they told me if I disappeared, if I let them erase me, they would keep you alive." My vision blurred for a second, not with tears, but with fury. "So you traded me," I said, voice low, like I was a secret that needed burying. "No," she snapped, eyes burning now. "I traded myself. I gave up everything so they wouldn't turn you into what they turned the others into." "What others?" I asked, heart thundering now. "What did they do?" Delilah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo, older than the others, faded and creased with time. In it, 4 children stood in front of a boarded-up building, all with eyes as dark as obsidian. All staring into the camera like they knew something no one else ever would. They were like you, she said. Born with it. Touched by it. And every single one of them was used, experimented on, manipulated until there was nothing left but power and hunger. I couldn't let that happen to you. The road stretched out endlessly ahead of us, but I felt like I was falling, through memory, through time, through everything I thought I understood about my life. So what now? I asked. What happens to me? Delilah finally looked at me, and for the first time since she picked me up, her expression softened. Now we stop running, she said. Now we find out exactly what they did to you, and we take back what they stole. She turned the wheel sharply and veered off the main road, down a dirt path that looked like it hadn't seen a tire in years. Trees closed in on us like guardians of something ancient and forgotten. My fingers curled around the seatbelt. My mind raced. But deep inside my chest, something else stirred, something older than fear. Something ready. You've been prepared for this longer than you know, Delilah said as the car rolled to a stop in front of a half-collapsed cabin surrounded by silence. Your memories, they've only been sleeping. They'll come back now. All of them. I stepped out of the car, the forest cold against my skin, the sky a silver bruise above us. And just before we walked through the threshold of the cabin door, Delilah turned to me one last time and said, "Everything they told you is a lie. But the truth? The truth is going to be so much worse." The cabin was nothing like I expected, and everything I should have feared. It stood on brittle legs, half-collapsed, windows shuttered with warped wood, the roof bowing under the weight of years and rain. It looked like it had once belonged to someone who thought they could disappear into the trees and be forgotten. But there was something alive in the walls. Not literally, not yet, but in the way the floorboards groaned as we stepped inside, in the way the light bent unnaturally through the slats like it knew this was no ordinary place. Delilah didn't wait. She walked through the narrow hallway like she'd been here 1,000 times, her hand tracing the wood grain along the walls like she was remembering old secrets, not revisiting them. I followed in silence, the weight of her confession still pressing down like a stone on my chest. Every step I took away from the world I thought I knew made the air thinner, heavier with the truth I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. You asked for the whole truth, Delilah said, turning suddenly. And you deserve it. But once I say it out loud, there's no undoing it. Once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at anything the same again. Not your childhood, not your memories, not even yourself. I've already lost everything that could make me look back, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. So say it. Delilah took a long breath, as if she needed permission not just to speak, but to survive what she was about to relive. I was 23 the last time I saw you, she began. You were barely 2 years old. That's when everything went to hell. We sat across from each other at a table so old it leaned with the weight of time, our hands barely an inch apart, but separated by decades of silence and the consequences of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. I didn't lose custody, she said. I didn't give you up. I didn't run. I was taken. My pulse kicked into a sprint, but I stayed still, waiting. There was a man, his name was Bennett Cross. He worked for a private intelligence agency that wasn't supposed to exist, one of those black-budget shadows the government pretends it shut down in the 80s. They were trying to manufacture someone with a unique neurological makeup. You weren't the first, but you were the only one who survived the trials without breaking. I blinked, trying to connect the pieces that now felt like the only puzzle that had ever mattered. You're saying I was a project? I asked. A lab rat? Delilah shook her head sharply. No. You were a weapon they couldn't control, because you were too human. Too loved. The silence between us thickened. I stared at her, my mind racing through every childhood memory I'd ever had, every dream I dismissed, every flash of pain I couldn't explain, Every night I woke up screaming without knowing why. They said I was mentally unstable, she continued. They framed me. Planted evidence. Had doctors declare me unfit to raise a child. And then they sent in the Callens, your so-called parents, not as legal guardians, but as placeholders. They were instructed to keep you hidden until they figured out what had gone wrong with their plan. My hands clenched into fists without meaning to. So they were never my family, I said, the words tasting like ash. Not even close. Delilah nodded slowly. They were decoys. And the only reason they were allowed to live was because they agreed to erase themselves, to raise you without questions, and to report anything unusual. I thought of the journal entries I found in the attic. The notes about my sleep-talking, the fever dreams, the way I knew things before I should have. I thought of how my mother, no, Martha, had looked at me, not with love, but with resignation. Like she was always waiting for something to wake up inside me. It started before I could walk, I murmured. They were tracking me before I even knew how to speak. Delilah didn't deny it. The moment you were born, you weren't a person to them, you were property. But something changed when they lost control of the program. A whistleblower inside the agency leaked files. The lab was shut down. Records destroyed. Everyone involved went underground. But they kept me, I said. They didn't come for me. Not until now. Delilah's face darkened. Because now you're legal. 18. A liability they no longer control under a false guardianship. You're free. And that makes you dangerous. She opened a weathered duffel bag at her side and pulled out a file, thick, sealed in plastic, marked with a black triangle and a date that chilled me to the bone. March 14th. The day I was born. Inside were medical records, field reports, photos, some of me, others of children who looked like me. Notes scribbled in cold, clinical handwriting. Subject exhibits elevated perceptual sensitivity. Latent extrasensory indicators confirmed. Neurological firestorm during REM sleep, containment advised. I closed the file slowly, my hands shaking but not from fear. From anger. From clarity. All of it, I whispered. Everything I thought was normal. Every nightmare, every coincidence. It was them. They did this to me. Delilah didn't answer. She didn't need to. So what happens now? I asked. Do we keep running? No, she said. We prepare. That night, I didn't sleep. Delilah showed me everything, the safe house network, the emergency codes, the files she had copied and hidden across 6 states in case she didn't survive. There were aliases, bank accounts, backdoors into databases that had long since been deleted from public record. She'd been ready for this moment for 18 years, and now that it was here, it felt like we were already behind. They'll come for you soon, she said. Not to talk. Not to negotiate. To erase. They've already tried, I replied. They just didn't realize I was awake. The next morning, I stood outside the cabin with a small black box in my hand, a device Delilah said would trigger if anyone from the agency tried to trace us through old surveillance routes. She handed it to me like it was a weapon. I took it like it was a promise. They don't know who you are now, she said. But they will. I stared into the trees, the wind curling through the branches like it carried voices too old to be understood. Somewhere out there, the people who stole my name, my blood, my identity, were watching. Waiting. But I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't a lab rat. I wasn't a project. I was the result of everything they were too afraid to finish. And I was done being afraid. That smile I gave them, the one I wore as I picked up the duffel bag they'd packed for me with forced compassion and cowardice, that wasn't the smile of a girl caught off guard. That wasn't the smile of a wounded child absorbing the truth about a life forged in betrayal. That wasn't weakness or confusion or surrender. No, that was something else entirely. That smile was the quiet victory of someone who had already played their final move. Because long before I walked out of that house and let the door slam shut behind me, I'd already set the fire they couldn't see coming. While they were sleeping through their own lies, convincing themselves I'd never know the truth, I had been building a plan designed to end them. The night I found the folder in the attic, my hands didn't just tremble with shock, they moved with intent. I scanned every page, photographed every document, created an encrypted backup, and uploaded all of it to a secure drive under a name they wouldn't recognize. Then I scheduled a video upload with a timestamp locked to my 18th birthday, my legal threshold, the moment their false authority died and mine began. But I didn't stop there. Because intelligence means very little without precision, and I had learned to be exact. I made 3 phone calls. One to a woman I knew only as Reyes, a contact buried deep in the fringe corners of digital activism, someone I trusted because she once took down a pharmaceutical giant and never asked for anything in return. I sent her the files, encrypted and sealed with my voice print. Her promise was simple. If I went silent for more than 48 hours, she would make sure the world knew everything. The second call was to an attorney named Elise Marlowe, former prosecutor, federal defense strategist, and, as I discovered, one of the few people left who still believed in the weight of justice. I didn't have to tell her everything, just enough. I told her there was a cover-up. I told her I had evidence. And I told her if anything happened to me, her name would be the one attached to the story that shattered a government shell game wide open. The third call was shorter. It was to someone I never thought I'd speak to again, my old chemistry teacher, Mr. Abram, the one who never asked why I worked alone or why I never flinched when the fire alarms went off. What he didn't know, and what I told him that night, was that I remembered the day he sat with me during detention and slid a flash drive across the table, whispering, "Not all rules are worth following. Some are just cages built to make quiet kids disappear." He was the one who taught me how to encrypt files. The one who showed me how to hide tracking signals and noise bursts. The one who helped me rig my phone with a ghost signal that would alert my contacts if I was taken. So when Delilah and I drove into that abandoned cabin, it wasn't an act of retreat. It was a waiting room for justice. And justice, when it came, didn't knock. It screamed in the form of polished black boots, rifles drawn, flashing lights bouncing off the treeline, and a voice over a megaphone calling for Martha and James Callan to come out with their hands raised. The timing was perfect. Orchestrated. I watched it unfold from the passenger seat of the red car, windows tinted, engine idling low. Beside me, the woman who had first appeared as a mystery in a photograph, now revealed to be not only my birth mother, but something far more dangerous, tapped her badge once against the dash. A small click echoed as the encrypted camera began recording. "Agent Delilah Wren," she said, her voice as sharp as glass. "Federal Special Investigations Division. Case number 412D17, codename. Inheritance Protocol." Yes, that's right. She wasn't just a runaway mother. She wasn't just someone who'd been hiding in fear. She had been working undercover the entire time, embedded, silenced, erased from the public record, gathering evidence while the people who took me thought she had vanished into the dark. When the officers swarmed the Callans' house, there was no struggle. Martha cried. James shouted about mistakes, about confusion, about love. But the evidence was too much. The files I sent to Elise had already triggered warrants. The medical reports, the journal entries, the bank transactions, the log of surveillance reports submitted by Martha and James over the years, all marked with the same initials, K.R. Bennett Cross, the man who orchestrated my abduction, the man who signed my childhood into a sealed record, and the man who, as of that morning, had been formally indicted under multiple counts of conspiracy, medical malpractice, kidnapping, and obstruction. I didn't flinch as they were arrested. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I watched through the tinted glass, my face still, my expression unreadable. Because this wasn't vengeance. This was reclamation. This was a girl rising not from victimhood, but from precision. "This ends today," Delilah said, switching off the recorder. No more shadows. No more silence. No more hiding. I opened the door, stepped out, Felt the ground beneath my feet like it had been waiting to carry me forward this entire time. A female officer approached me with cautious eyes and a warm, tired smile. "Are you Aria May Wren?" she asked. I nodded once. "We've been looking for you for a long time," she said. "But it looks like you've already found yourself." The headlines came quickly after that. Project Inheritance exposed. Federal conspiracy in experimental child program revealed. Whistleblower agent resurfaces with missing child survivor. But none of them told the full story. None of them could capture what it meant to be raised inside a lie so carefully constructed, even your screams felt scripted. None of them understood what it took to sit quietly at family dinners, listening to stories about vacations you never took and promises that were never meant to be kept. None of them knew what it felt like to decode your own mind and find a network of truths buried so deep you had to rip yourself open just to feel real again. They raised me to be obedient. They raised me to follow instructions. They raised me to be quiet, unassuming, easy to control. But what they didn't understand, what they could never control, was that they also raised me to be sharp. And I learned. Every rule. Every lie. Every inconsistency. I cataloged them. I waited. And when the moment came, I did what they feared most. I used everything they taught me against them. Because the best revenge is not rage. It's revelation. And now, standing outside that house, my arms folded across my chest, my eyes dry and my spine steel, I finally understood something they never had. They created me to be a ghost. But I became a storm. As the last officer shut the cruiser door, taking the people who raised me into custody for crimes they thought would die with my silence, Delilah stepped beside me, the air between us charged but quiet. "Are you ready?" she asked. I didn't turn to face her. I didn't need to. My eyes were on the horizon, on the world I was about to enter, not as a fugitive, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had turned her inheritance into an arsenal. "They raised me to be smart," I said, my voice cold but clear. "Just not smart enough to outsmart me." The air hung still for a moment, the kind of stillness that comes just before a final page turns. But just when I thought it was over, I discovered something else in that folder, something they didn't want anyone to see.